Risk Management Framework and Information System Security Officer and Cybersecurity Questions. What kind of questions do they ask? This is Bruce, and I've done this for a very long time. And I've been through many interviews with the private and the public sector, and I have a very good idea of how this works. What I'm going to be giving you is a sample of how I answer questions. Now, if you're interested in this kind of material, go down in the description below and you'll find downloadables, you'll find free material, as well as full-blown courses on how to get into Information System Security Officer work and how to do risk management framework and other stuff. Let's get into this. This is a sample of how I actually answer these particular questions. Now, what I've noticed, first off, is that there's usually about 3 different interviews that you have to go through doing cybersecurity, risk management framework, and Information System Security Officer. Why do they do this? Well, the first group of questions, the first person who asks you the questions are usually screeners. They're staffing agencies, or they're technical recruiters, or they're internal hiring offices that are contacting you. So typically they don't really know what you do. They're not doing this for a living. They don't do cybersecurity, and sometimes they don't even do IT work. They don't know anything about it. They're just asking a list of questions to see if you meet their requirements. So it's a screening interview. There's no pressure. They found you somewhere online, or maybe you were referred to them by someone who knows you, and they're contacting you to see if you're a good fit for this company, if you meet the basic requirements. Here's the kind of questions they ask. They'll ask something like, do you have experience doing cybersecurity? More importantly, they'll say, I see on your resume that you've done cybersecurity. Can you tell me a little bit about your experience doing cybersecurity? Now, first off, this is a very general kind of question, and this is an indication that this person really doesn't know what is going on. They are just reading from a list of questions that they're supposed to ask you to see. I see this as a teaching moment. So what I typically do is I'll educate. Now, I'm not condescending. I'm not treating them like a child. I just know that this is not their industry. They're good at HR or technical recruiting. This is not their industry. So I'll tell them, I'll do just like this. I'll say, well, sir, cybersecurity is a really big field. So what I do, the part that I do, is network security. Now, if it's not network security, obviously, I'll say, I do Information System Security Officer work. Now, I've done other things in cybersecurity. I've done a little bit of SIEM technology. I've done some scanning. I used Nessus before. I've also done risk management framework and Information System Security Officer work. I've done that for the past 4 years. And so that's what I do. That's the piece that I do. I don't do much forensics. I don't do much IDS work. I'm kind of light on that, if you notice in my resume. But as far as cybersecurity goes, I do risk management framework, which is basically security compliance. There you go. That's a teaching moment. Another thing they'll sometimes ask me, which is kind of a general or kind of an off question, where you know that this person doesn't know your industry. They'll say something like, well, sir, I see that you've done DITSCAP before. Okay, that's what our client is looking for. Can you tell me about your experience doing DITSCAP? And then I'll educate them. I'll say, well, sir, DITSCAP is actually a very legacy version of risk management framework. Risk management framework is a modernized version of security compliance. So yes, in the past I've done DITSCAP, but it's actually evolved to DIACAP and then to risk management framework, which is what we use now, mostly in the federal government. So that's what we use, and I use as a reference NIST 837. So it's a teaching moment. I've just educated them and told them, hey, yes, I've used that in the past, but this is what we use now. And so this does 2 things. For one thing, it tells them, hey, this is the question I should be asking, risk management framework. Another thing is it allows them to know, hey, this person knows not only DITSCAP and this old legacy system, but they also know this new current system, they're usually pretty thankful when you give them a little bit of more education about what's going on in your field. And you're not being condescending. You're not being mean or treating them like a child. You're just using that as a teaching moment to say, hey, I know a lot about this subject. I've been around for a long time. Now, it might not be DITS cap. You probably don't even know what that is. But it might be, maybe they'll say something like Sidewinder firewalls. If you're familiar with Sidewinder firewalls, that's a legacy version of a firewall. It's now called, I believe, a McAfee firewall. It's a teaching moment. You could tell them, no, yes, I used to work on Sidewinder firewalls, but now we work on McAfee firewalls. McAfee bought Sidewinder firewalls about 6-7 years ago, and now that's what they call it. But yeah, I am familiar with the legacy version, but I'm more familiar with the more current version. So they'll go back to the employer, the actual person who's going to hire you, and they'll say, yeah, this person really knows their stuff. So use it as a teaching moment when you're going through the screening interview. Let's go to the next question here. So another question I get is, they'll usually go right off your resume and they'll ask you things that the employer is asking them to ask you. So they'll say, so have you done information security officer work before? I see on your resume that you've done that before. How many years have you done it for? They're looking for your experience level. So I'll tell them, well, ma'am, I've done this for the past 20 years. Actually, I've been doing this since 2000. And I've actually been doing this as they've been evolving the system over time. So I've got a lot of experience doing information system security officer work, but I've got to be honest, I haven't done it for 20 straight years. I actually started in 2000, but I broke away and I did some technical work for about another 5 or 6 years where I did Unix, I did Linux administration, I've done Windows administration on servers, I've done some field technical work, I've also done some networking work, and then I've also done telecom work. So what you're doing here is you're filling in the gaps. You're giving them a history of what you've done, and you're filling in all the gaps of your resume. You're telling them, here's what I've done. You don't have to go in great detail because remember, this is not a technical person. They just want to know if you know information system security officer work or whatever they asked you. They're going off your resume asking you that, but you use that as a teaching moment. You use that to tell them, hey, I know other things. I don't know just this. Now, here's another thing. Let's say you don't have any information security officer experience. Here's how I would answer this. Or risk management framework. Let's say you don't know anything, you have not done it before, okay? You need to know it. If you apply for this job, if you're interested in doing risk management framework, if you're interested in doing pen testing, firewalls, whatever the case may be, but you don't have any experience in it, what you need to do is, number one, don't lie. And don't try to fake what you have, because that's a very bad, it's not going to go your way, and you'll see why as we go to the other interviews. Here's how I'd answer if I don't have any information system security officer experience. Well, sir, I don't actually have information system security officer experience. I actually have been working on the help desk for the last 3 years, but I'm very, very interested in doing information system security officer work. And I actually have worked alongside the information system security office when I was working at my previous job. Although I only did the patches on the servers, and I actually only worked with all of the 1,000 different clients that we had on the floor that we worked at, what I would do to help out the information system security officer office was I would put together documentation for them, which I know is a very key portion of information system security officer work. So even though I have never had the title of an information system security officer, I've actually worked with them and I actually know a lot about it. I've been studying about it, and I'm very interested and excited to actually take on this new role as an information system security officer. So that's one of the things you can do. Don't fake it. Don't try to tell them that you're something that you're not. Tell them what you are and tell them how much you know. So that being said, you need to know about what you're getting into. You need to let them know, hey, I've studied this. I really want to get into it. I'm very interested and I'm excited. The next very common question I get is, do I have a clearance? They'll say, okay, sir, I see that I'm wondering if on your resume, I don't see it here, but do you have a clearance? And so they'll ask you, if you have a clearance, what level of clearance do you have? And is it still active? That's another very common question that I get. And I'll just say, yes, ma'am, I do have a clearance, and it's yada, yada, yada. It's a secret clearance. It's a TS clearance with polygraph. It was active at my last job. It was active, or I don't know if it's actually valid anymore. I'm not sure if it expired, but I have had one in the past. Now, if you're doing information system security officer work, if you're doing risk management framework, what you ought to know is that 9 times out of 10, you have to be eligible to get a security clearance. That means you have to be a U.S. citizen, because you can't get a secret clearance unless there's some other way to do it in the U.S. You can't be a U.S.-based secret clearance, correct me if I'm wrong, unless you are a U.S. citizen. So that said, this kind of cuts a lot of people out of this. So I'll just honestly tell them, yes, I have a security clearance. Here's the type that I have, and yes, it's active. Or no, I'm not sure if it's active. A lot of times I have no idea whether it's still active or if it expired or whatever. I'm just very honest with them. Now, moving on. Do you have a security plus or certification? They'll typically know, because they'll be reading off of your resume and they'll ask you about that certification, but very rarely do I get that question. They'll very rarely ask me if I have a BS or some sort of a degree, but the clearance actually, the certification comes up more often than the degree does. Now, another thing you can say is, if you don't have the appropriate certification, what you could say is, well, sir or ma'am, I do have a security plus, but I don't have this required CISSP, but I am working on the CISSP, and I plan to have it within a year, if that's okay. So you're telling them, hey, I'm making an effort to actually get the certification that you guys require, or I'm willing to take the test for the security clearance, or so for the security certification or IT certification. Another common question that's very important is location. They'll often tell you, hey, this job is actually located in Virginia, or this job is actually located in Washington, D.C., or this job is located in Plano, Texas. Will it be a problem for you to relocate? Or where do you live right now? May I ask where you're living right now, and would you be willing to relocate? And you got to just be honest. It's just a yes or no. It's pretty on or off. Either you live there or you're willing to locate, or you're not. So just be very honest with them. And another thing they'll ask is about travel. Do you mind? This job requires 10% travel. Are you willing to travel? And again, it's just a yes or no, maybe. You can't be in between. No maybes. It's got to be yes or no, I'm not. And then that either ends it or it goes to the next level. Now, the last question that the screener will usually ask you is, what salary are you looking for? They'll ask it something like that. Sir, may I ask what salary you're looking for? What is the annual salary that you're looking for? What is the hourly amount that you're looking for? And what I normally do, this is a very important question. You got to be ready for it, because you don't want it to hit you off guard. If you go too high, you're going to price yourself right out of a job. So you don't want to go too high. So right out the gate, you should have some idea of what you're willing to accept. If you go too low, they just might give you that. So you want to go somewhere in between. So what I do is I typically go off of what I currently make and try to go for a little bit more than what I make. Now, that's a pretty conservative way to go about it. You should probably go for a little bit more than I do, but that's what I do, and it's always worked. I always get somewhere in there where I'm getting a little bit more than the last job that I made, and I found that works for me. But the thing is to just have it in your mind of how much you are willing to take, and then say that amount. So they'll say something like, so Bruce, what salary are you actually looking for? And I'll say, well, I'm looking to make $95,000. That's it. You just tell them how much you're willing to make. So just keep in mind, you're kind of stuck with that number once you tell them. And sometimes what they'll do is if you're going to the next level of the interview, they'll say, okay, can I have you sign this non-disclosure agreement? Or sometimes they'll say, can you send me an email confirming that you're willing to take this amount? If it's a contractor job, they want to kind of lock you in to their staffing agency at this amount so that you don't come back and say, I want $90 an hour or I want $130,000 or something like that. They don't want you to suddenly change your mind. They want to kind of lock you into a number. So just keep that in mind. Have something in your head before the end of that interview. Now, the second interview that you get is normally the hiring manager. This is a person who comes from the actual company you're going to be working for. This is a person who's like an upper level manager who's going to be responsible for yes or no, or whether you're going to get hired. This is a person who is a general manager. There's somewhere in the food chain for hiring manager. Now, sometimes I've been sent directly to the technical people, which we'll talk about next, but sometimes, usually it's the hiring manager that's next. They'll send me, the technical recruiter will say, hey, you're going to get an email from Bruce Rogers, and he is or she is the hiring manager. So just be ready for that email. They'll send me an email. They'll set up a time of when I'm going to actually either meet them in person or call them over the phone. Usually I've noticed that most of the modern, these days, the more current way of doing this is just do it either over the phone or over Skype and not normally meet in person. Especially if it's like a remote job. It's going to just be over the phone or on Skype or something like that. So the second hiring manager is going to ask things pertaining to whether or not you're a good fit for their company. They're going to educate you on the company, and they're going to ask you if you're good. They're going to see if you're a good fit for the company. And this is an opportunity for you to ask them questions about whether they're a fit for you. So you're kind of interviewing them. So they'll ask something like, typically ask, what is your experience with risk management framework? And I'll say, I'll just walk them through my resume. They already have my resume in front of them. I'm just walking them right through it. I'll say, well, I actually started working in risk management framework back when it was called something else. It was called actually DITSCAP, and it evolved to DIACAP. I actually did this in the U.S. military. I was in the Air Force for 8 years, and part of that time I actually did this work for the military. Now, actually, after I got out, I became a contractor. I did some more technical work where I was working for different contract agencies. I did some networking. I did some field technician work. I worked on routers. I worked on switches. I worked on servers. But then I got back into my bread and butter, which is risk management framework, security compliance. That's really my specialty. So my experience goes all the way back to 2000, and I have a diverse set of skills, as you can see on my resume. So this is your opportunity to kind of tell them what you're all about. Who are you? What is your profession in? What is your skill set? To let them know, hey, this is who I am professionally, and here's how I can fit into your agency. This is your opportunity to do that. So another thing they'll ask is, what places have you worked? They'll kind of pull more information from you. They'll say, well, what kind of places have you worked? What other organizations, and what were those places like? They'll just kind of get more information from you. Then if they see that you're a fit, they'll start telling you a little bit more about their company. They'll start telling you, well, this job is actually located in Virginia. It's shift work. Are you willing to relocate? And if the answer is no, and it's in a specific location, end of discussion, move on. If it happens to be where you live and you can commute there, then the interview actually keeps going. Say, where are you located? Well, I'm also in Virginia, and I'm definitely willing to move closer if necessary, but I don't think it's necessary. Then they'll say something like, how do you deal with different kinds of customers? How do you deal with difficult customers? I get this question a lot with risk management framework and information system security officer work. How do you deal with difficult customers? And the reason why is because a lot of times we're dealing with the federal government. And the federal government can be a very difficult customer because they're civil servants, and some of them some of them are kind of arrogant. Some of them are very stuck in their ways. Some of them are stubborn. Not all. There's some really good people, but every now and then you get this person who's kind of belligerent, and they're a difficult customer because they have pressure coming from above a lot of times. And so they're dealing with that pressure, and they're putting that pressure on you to get certain things done. So how do you deal, Bruce, how do you deal with difficult customers? Well, this is a question I get often. That's what I say. And I'm actually very good at dealing with customers because I tell them the facts and I calm them down. I never escalate the situation. I always calm them down by just telling them facts and speaking very calmly. And I'll often keep records of our conversation, and I will tell them what's going on, and I'll give you a specific example. I had a customer that had, okay, so just off the record here, this is not an actual customer. I'm just giving you an example of certain things that kind of are similar to what has happened. Okay, so keep that in mind. It's not actual clients or customers or anything like that. So I would say things like this. I'll say, well, let me give an example of a difficult customer I had. So we had this difficult customer. He was a colonel in the Army, and we had this network that we had to build. And so this network wasn't working properly, and that was a big deal because this network connected a major system that they had to get it done, and we also had to update the system. So he was very belligerent, and rightly so, because everything was just array, and then we had this huge mission that we had to do. So I had to sit down with that colonel, and I had to calm him down. I just told him the facts. I said, well, sir, ops team is actually working on it, and what I'm doing right now is I'm documenting all the problems and all the issues so that we can get through this process. We're updating all of our documentation, our plan procedures, and our wikis to make sure that this doesn't happen again, or we can fix this faster. We've got some soldiers that are also working with us to make this the most complete procedures possible, and they should have this done. They will have it done by tomorrow. So if you have any issues, sir, you can take it up with me, or you can take it up with my boss. My boss is going to sit in on the meeting tomorrow, and we're going to actually hash all this out. And by that time, everything should be good. So that colonel was still upset. However, he had all the facts. He knew when we were going to have the system back up. He knew that we're going to make it so it's not going to happen again. And so what I do, sir, is I calm the situation down by just giving straight facts. And I have dealt with difficult customers before. That's how I answer it. What you do is you say, look, I've had this happen before, and here's how I calm the situation down, and giving them a specific example of how you've done it. And they're always blown away and impressed by that. So another thing they'll do is they'll educate you on their customer and on their company. And this is an opportunity for you to ask questions. They'll say, well, that's our company, X, Y, and Z, and we've been in business for X amount of time. Here's the person who runs the company. Here's our main business. Here's our main client. Are you familiar with it? Say no. They'll give you more information about it. And then they'll say, do you have any questions for me? So you got to ask questions. Okay, the main questions that you want to ask is how much travel is it? Where is the travel? Are there any benefits? How much money? What's the salary range? Ask them that. What's the salary range? Usually they don't know. That is all handled by the actual screener. You can always ask the screener that. What's the salary range? If they ask you, hey, how much do you want? What's the salary range? Sometimes they'll actually tell you. That's a little tip. Sometimes they'll actually tell you what the range is, and you just go for the highest range or close to it. So they either pay it or they don't. So anyway, so they'll ask you, so you got to ask them, where's the travel? How much travel is it? Those are usually my main questions, because I'm very concerned with travel, because I've been places where I travel 70%, and that's a lot. That is a lot of travel. Another thing you want to ask is about the benefits, because sometimes they'll have incredible benefits that you can't pass up. Any other questions that you have, you got to ask them right then, and they'll be happy to answer it for you. But have them ready to go. What I'll do is I'll write all the questions that I want down before the interview even starts. Now, if everything is good to go, if they like you, what they'll do is they'll ask you sometimes, hey, do you mind if we contact your previous employer? They just want to get more information, or they want to verify that you are who you say you are. And sometimes, usually what they'll do is they say, okay, I like this interview, everything went well, I will get you in contact with someone else. And this will be the more technical person that you're going to contact, that they're going to contact you actually. And this third interview is usually more technical. Sometimes it's in person. It's usually going to be like your coworker. It's going to be somebody you're going to see on a regular basis. It'll be a supervisor, or it'll be another information security officer. They're going to ask you very specific questions. This is why it's imperative that you don't lie in your resume. You don't lie about what you know. You don't, because they're going to expose you. So, because they're going to know if you're trying to blow smoke. And the recruiter doesn't know. You could totally blow smoke on the recruiter. You could probably blow smoke and fake out the actual manager. But this is a person you can't fake out. You don't want to get to this point and you have a bunch of lies and you really don't know what you're talking about. You want to be very honest and upfront, because this person will expose you. And you'll just be a laughing stock. That's what'll happen. So they'll ask something like, can you walk me through the risk management framework process? And I'll walk them through it. I'll say, well, so having done this for a long time, I noticed that some agencies have a slightly different variation on how they do it. But typically, you have a first step, which is to prepare for getting into the process. Now, preparation means that you're going to have to contact all of the stakeholders. And typically, my main point of contact is going to be the system engineer or the system administrator, who I'm going to work very closely with. I'm going to do meetings. We're going to talk back and forth. So I get to know the system and I get to educate them on what process we have to do to get this system secure. And they get to educate me on how they're actually going to implement this stuff. So that's the first step. Then we're going to categorize in the system. We're going to categorize it to make sure we have the proper level of impact. If the system should go down or if something happens with the system, we know what the impact level is. We've categorized the security of the system. Then we go to selecting the security controls. Now, usually when I come into an agency, they've already gone through this entire process, but it's important I know all the pieces and parts of this process so that I know where to pick up whichever system we're in. I know where we are, and that's in that particular 7-stage process. So that's what I do to tell. I just walk them through. Here's what I've done. Here's my experience. Now, let's say you don't have any experience and they ask you, can you walk me through the risk management process? You need to know it. If you're applying for a risk management framework job, if you're applying for a network job, if you're applying for a firewall job, whatever the case may be, you need to know. You need to have read. You can just be frank with them and say, well, sir, even though I've never done the risk management framework process, I'm very familiar with it. I've read about it. I actually used to work with the team from time to time. I knew of some information system security officers who did the risk management framework process. I've been studying it. I know that the NIST 837 is the entire process. I've read through that document several times. I'm very familiar with it, so I can walk you through every part of it. And then you just go through everything you know, and they'll be impressed with your knowledge if you've done your homework. So just be very honest and be very frank with this person, because they know this process inside and out. And just let them know you're willing to learn. You're excited about getting into it. Sometimes they will choose somebody who's excited to work in there over somebody who's very arrogant and has done it for 20 years and they're not willing to learn. They want everyone to do it their way and they're not willing to learn. They'll take that excited person who's just getting into the career field over this guy who's been in 20 years who is not willing to learn, who can't work with people because they have this idea in their head of how everything's supposed to be. They would rather work with that new person. Be honest. Okay, so other questions that they'll ask is over and over again. Can you work with difficult customers? And you tell them flat out. You give an experience of how you work with customers. You tell them exactly what you do. That's how you handle that situation. So other questions I get is very specific questions. They'll ask questions that are very technical, and you have to do the best you can. If you don't know, tell them. Don't fake it. Just tell them, I'm not sure about that, but I would love to learn. I'm very excited to learn about it. I have read a little bit about it, but I don't know a lot about auditing. I have not done it before, but I'm very interested in learning it. Another thing that they'll ask, aside from very specific questions, sometimes what they'll do in technical interviews, especially if it's a technical position, is they'll actually have you come in and give them commands. Or if you're doing a phone interview, they'll ask you the commands. They'll give you situations. They'll say, okay, you have a Cisco router and it's not booting up and you're not sure why. On the third try, you've booted it up, but now everything's erased off the system. What do you do? And you have to walk them through what you'll do. Well, we've backed the system up, and I've backed it up onto another drive. I'm going to take the configs, the Cisco configs, and I'm going to load them up on that Cisco iOS system. And they're going to say, well, how are you going to do that? Can you tell me the commands? And you got to tell them the commands. Sometimes they'll have you right there typing up the commands. One time I was in a lab environment. They actually literally sat down taking notes while I'm doing stuff. They say, okay, show me how you transfer files from here to here. Okay, now show me what command you use to see the directory. Okay, now show me what they'll actually do that in technical. If it is an extremely technical position, sometimes they'll actually have a lab and have you and like walk you through it. So those are the types of questions you're going to get. Those are the types of interviews you're going to get. You're going to have a screening interview who's going to see if you fit the requirements. Then you're going to have a manager type interview, and it can come in a different order because sometimes they'll have the technical one first, but typically it's the hiring managers what they try to do because they want to know if you are a fit for the company. Are you willing to travel? Do you know basic things? Do you have a CISSP or a Security Plus or whatever certification? Do you even live close? Is your salary within range? Things like that is what the hiring manager wants to know. Then you'll be sitting down with a technical recruiter, and this person's going to see if you can actually do what you claim you can do on your resume. And they're going to see if you're excited about this. Can you work with others? That's another really big one. Can you work with others? Are you excited to work with them? Or are you arrogant? Are you not willing to learn? Are you pushy? They want to know those kinds of things, and this is an opportunity for you to show who you really are. So that's it in a nutshell. I know this video is pretty long, but if you're actually interested in the interview process, this is the stuff that you have to know. There's 3 different interviews. They go for days and days at a time because you're doing 3. Sometimes I've done as many. The most I've done is probably 5 different interviews. The least I've done is a couple interviews with the same person a couple times. So that's it, guys. I'll see you on the next one.